Give me money, give me money, give me money, give me money, give me money.
I promised myself I wouldn't do this. I swore unto the demons you pathetic mortals call gods that I would never go down this road again, but here we are. I'm gonna talk about those fucking comics. Or rather, an idea presented by one comic that Friendship is Magic has repeated on 2 different episodes. Fuck my life. I mean, my life is great, but fuck my life. Fluttershy's Micro is one of the many Friendship is Magic comics that have flooded the market since MLP took off the way it did. The comics have their own dedicated fan base that's constantly flipping back and forth between worrying that the comics might become mandatory reading to understand the show, which is always a baseless fear as Friendship is Magic is still episodic, and getting consistently angry when the show puts their worries at ease by completely ignoring something from the comics anyway. The story goes that Fluttershy enters an art contest held by Princess Celestia, only to find her entries viciously torn apart by a notoriously harsh art critic named Praiserpan. After being reduced to the usual pre-season 5 Fluttershy behavior, Princess Celestia arrives and praises her art, which results in Praiserpan and his entourage very quickly changing their positions to match a figure with as much reverence as Celestia. Praiserpan was the standout character of the comic, if only because it was the first of 3 instances of Hasbro lashing out at the critical reception toward Friendship is Magic. He is the cartoonish exaggeration of an art critic, overwhelmingly negative entirely for the purpose of being harsh and eviscerating people, positioning himself as the head of an art world for about 10 minutes before Princess Celestia comes in and supplants him because queen. Ever since Fame and Misfortune, it's no surprise that Hasbro views critics of its work like this. Here's the problem with Praiserpan though. These kind of critics don't exist. But Silverquill said, I know what Silverquill said, Strawman, I'm getting to that. That's actually the meat of this whole video. Why are you even here? You didn't even finish your strawman argument to begin with. Friendship is Magic's portrayal of critics is clearly a false one, born out of a very obvious bitterness about the way some vocal people can damage the company's bottom line. The only reason Fame and Misfortune even exists was because it was a corporate mandate from Hasbro that M.A. Larson was forced to write exactly the way they wanted it written. Unfortunately, these nakedly obvious instances of lashing out against critics are never given the ridicule they deserve and are often lauded as good episodes by the very people it's lashing out against. One of the reasons these things get defended so much is because last year, Silverquill put out a video talking about this same comic, and one of his usual supplement videos he talked about Praiserpan as a character and hand-wringing about negative criticism. This actually showcases one of Silver's biggest weaknesses as a critic. See, when it comes to analyzing direct story threads, Silver has always been one of the strongest people in the analysis community. However, when things get more ambiguous, information is left missing, either deliberately or due to laziness on part of the writer, or we have to start getting into meta discussion, Silver has always been extremely myopic. His own critical style is something he presents as seeking positivity, but in practice what he does is sugarcoating, pointing out the positive and then making ineffectual nods to the negative in extremely soft and sanded off language. Silver can't just call a bad idea, he's gotta waffle around it for an unnecessary amount of time. This extends to meta discussion like this supplement because he claims to see this kind of behavior everywhere, but because he has an extremely non-confrontational attitude toward everything, he won't say where or who. It's just, it's there, trust me. But I've seen what he means in practice. Like, you know this joke from my addendum on self-destruction?
Even with that fervor having died down, the show itself can't even reference the fact that yes, Twilight has a title now, without invoking a deluge of largely manufactured criticism about titles creating expectations but not bestowing qualities. Don't give me that look.
That joke invoked a direct message from Silver, well, partially direct, he got someone else to deliver it for him, saying that I was tearing someone else down to build myself up and that it was petty. Now, that wasn't actually a criticism of Silver in any way, it was a joke at the expense of a largely meaningless phrase that he overuses to the point of absurdity. But since it was slightly negative, out come the defensive platitudes. So that gives us a general idea of what Silver deems unnecessary negativity. Any negativity whatsoever. Now, if I were a brutally honest person, I could say that this reflexive need to deride any negativity whatsoever and propping up one's own critical style of destructive positivity and sugarcoating reeks of trying to tear other people down in order to build oneself up, and then tarring other critics with that same behavior in a striking example of psychological projection. And I am a brutally honest person, which is why I just did. The fact is, extremely negative critics don't behave that way out of a need to put themselves on top. They behave that way because audiences love it. The angry review is one of the most popular styles of review on the internet, and it's popular because audiences who consume criticism as entertainment love watching people get angry. They've loved it ever since Doug Walker, James Rolfe, and Yahtzee Croshaw popularized it as a form of entertainment. The idea that hyper-negative critics, or even critics who don't sugarcoat anything, are trying to build themselves up and put themselves on top is complete and total bullshit. And the hand-wringing about discouraging future attempts is irrelevant. It's not a critic's job to care or even think about the motivations of a creator. The only times a creator comes into focus is when the work is a direct translation of that creator's beliefs. Like when Mel Gibson makes a movie about how much someone is enduring severe hardship and persecution for their beliefs, and people connect that to the well-deserved critical mauling The Passion of the Christ got for being a mindless anti-Semitic gore fest that completely spits on the story of Christ. Or that time Clint Eastwood said that this generation is full of pussies while he went on to make movies about manly men doing manly things. He just loves men so fucking much. Whether or not a creator is encouraged or discouraged doesn't mean shit. Some creators are so fragile that they will get discouraged and quit when they get any negative feedback whatsoever. Tough. That's life. If you take it that personally, either delete the comment or block the person. If you quit because people say bad things about your work, that's entirely on you. Don't try and blame other people for your sour ego. This isn't some indie cartoonist making this comic, and frankly, even if it was, the message would still be complete nonsense. This is a massive corporation with hundreds of artists and writers on their payroll, many of which already got paid before the comic even released. As a rule, you should always be skeptical when a corporation tries to paint critics as ego-driven or narcissistic. Remember that most critics aren't in it for themselves, they're in it for you. Their job is to watch tons of movies, eat at tons of restaurants, and do all other kinds of stuff so that you don't waste your hard-earned money on something bad. It costs you nothing to read a review, but it costs you money to see a movie or buy a comic. Money that is in short supply for a lot of people. While most people just check Rotten Tomatoes or similar aggregate sites, those sites have to get their information from somewhere. When the same people selling you the thing tell you that the critics are bad or try to put the seed of doubt in your mind, you should always be skeptical. A company like Hasbro has everything to gain from telling people that critics are only in it for themselves. A critic has nothing to gain from being needlessly negative. Being negative in any shape or form, especially in post-release discussion-style criticism like I or Silverquill engage in, doesn't equate to putting yourself on top. Ever. What actually happens in this environment is a deluge of venom, threats, and absolute rage from people who've signed on for a full frontal lobotomy and replaced all of their identity with fandom. For many, it isn't worth a critic's time or mental well-being to put up with the kind of literary vandalism that hardcore fans will scrawl all over their comment sections the moment their precious princeling has been criticized, or worse, their terrible attitude is rebuked. The only way to get popular doing that is if large audiences delude themselves into thinking you're not actually a critic and your work are not actually reviews, which many people have done with Yahtzee. In reality, dealing in criticism this way involves dealing with fandom, and fandoms are notorious for being provoked by the strangest things and are downright deranged in their response to criticism. Having to deal with crazy and delusional shit that bronies spew at me for criticizing their latest waifu is a headache in my job, not a positive. If anything, the real bid for popularity is unwavering positivity and negativity that's doused in asterisk because fans will flock, no pun intended, to you in order to get their opinions affirmed. And if you happen to tell them that the people being negative don't really hold their opinions and are just trying to be popular by making a scene, well, you just cemented yourself as a darling of the criticism world, haven't you? The problem with Silver's reading of critics is that his own existence contradicts it. It's extremely ironic hearing a deriding of negativity as pushing for popularity come from the most popular critic in the Brony analysis community, one who is popular exclusively because he sugarcoats everything to maintain a friendly and approachable persona, even when it comes to things that is irresponsible to sugarcoat. But this kind of shit is not reflective of critics at all. That speech at the end of Ratatouille was meaningless. A critic does not enjoy a position over others. A critic's job is tiresome, it's exhausting, it's thankless, and it's a job that persists entirely out of a genuine love for the medium they work in. The idea that critics are some kind of elitist snobs who position themselves as a pseudo-aristocracy? Yeah, it would be beneficial for a company like Disney to put that thought in your head, wouldn't it? The thing is, critics do influence a medium. They can hurt a company's bottom line. As much as people pretend that what critics say doesn't mean anything, it does. It was critics panning Batman v Superman that made it a financial disappointment for Warner Brothers and resulted in a massive redirection to potentially move away from grimdark fanfiction and toward something with a little more dignity. Critics can, and often do, cost companies money. Of course they're going to try and delegitimize their critics. Corporations want the easiest road to all of your money that they can possibly get. And critics daring to encourage the audience to have any standards whatsoever are the biggest roadblock standing in the way. And this is the part where I pull the rug out from under Silver, and those of you who've read the comic were probably waiting for this. The very last panel of the comic is an admission from Fluttershy that she shouldn't be letting negative criticism discourage her from expressing herself through art. Which is exactly what I said a few weeks ago on Glass of Water. When you're faced with negative feedback, you have two choices. You can get discouraged and quit, or you can pull up your big kid pants and get better. Silver spends most of his supplementary video hand-wringing about the imaginary problem of critics discouraging creators from expressing themselves, but the comic itself takes its last panel to actively call bullshit on that make-believe posturing by both Silverquill and the corporate executives at Hasbro. Some people mistook this as the comic saying to ignore criticism, but in reality it was putting the onus on the creator to persist in the face of criticism and not make it the critic's job to stroke your ego. That's what royalty's for. Despite Silver's claim that there will always be people like Prazerpan, nobody is ever like Prazerpan. Not even the worst critics of the analysis community are like Prazerpan. Prazerpan is the fantasy of a critic that people whose work gets panned like to imagine exists. They're the adult equivalent of when your mother told you that the bully was picking on you because he was jealous of you. It's not that what you created was bad. No, it could never be that. There must be some ulterior motive. The people being negative are just bitter or toxic or too aggro. The fact that some people bought this bullshit hook, line, and sinker says more about their priorities than it does the integrity of critics. It should never be a critic's job to care about the interests of a company like Hasbro or whether or not some indie darling might get discouraged by negative criticism. In fact, a critic who does prioritize those things should expect to lose their fucking job. Creators who get discouraged by negative criticism act that way because of psychological issues within themselves that they have decided to not work through and deal with. Even more creators deal with criticism properly and get better as a result. Scott Cawthon being a particularly notable example. Criticism is a reality of the art world. There might be bad critics, but they'll be bad critics because they say nothing, abuse platitudes, and constantly append their statements with "in my opinion." The people who push the idea that negative criticism is someone tearing others down to build themselves up are little more than simpering brats who can't handle being criticized. Grow the fuck up.